Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you, or see your names at least. It's fun to see some familiar names and some new names. Welcome. I'm glad to have you all here. And thanks for taking some time out of your afternoon. So my name is Kendra Lomax, and I'll be both opening us up on behalf of the ConnectEd team and also sharing some ideas with us all to think about together today. So I'll introduce myself, and while I'm doing that, if in the chat you would be willing to share a little bit about yourself as well, if you want to share your role in education and where you're zooming in from, we can start to see who else is in the room. And I know this is a busy time of day, so if you are in commute with your kiddos or wrapping up things at school, that's just fine. You're welcome to just listen in. But for those of you that are able, would you add in the chat window just a little bit about yourself, kind of your role? Are you a classroom teacher? And also where you're zooming in from. I started as a classroom teacher and now work at the University of Washington. I became very curious about how young children learn mathematics. And so I came to the University of Washington to study more about that. And ever since have been working alongside classroom teachers, as well as some of our teachers in training here at the university to continue to learn more about both supporting teacher learning, as well as about children's mathematics. So we're going to play with both of those ideas today. Hi, you all. Thank you for adding some ideas in the chat. Great. We've got a whole range of roles in the room, it looks like so far. Keep adding those in. So this series is really focused on ways that we can know our students more deeply and create learning spaces where they thrive. So I hope to carry that theme through. Just a few housekeeping things. If you want to use closed captioning, you can look for the CC box down in the bottom window. You should have access to that. You'll also find the chat. So if you haven't found that already, please do. Feel free to make use of the chat as we go along, add in ideas, questions, comments that come up for you. There's also a Q&A feature if you want to add questions there that you hope that I will get to at the end. I will pay attention to that as well. So I'm going to try and wrap up by 5:15, and then I'll stick around for Q&A after that. So if you've got places to go at 5:15, you can be looking towards that. Oh, it's so nice to see you all. Okay, great. Thank you for introducing yourselves. That's really helpful just to have some context. So let's get going. So today we're really going to think about how to support teacher learning. So some of you are in like formal roles where you might serve the role of supporting teacher learning. Even if you're a classroom teacher, I think a lot of these ideas will feel interesting to you and relevant to the work that you're hoping to do alongside of your PLC colleagues, or even thinking about supporting your own learning. What do I need to do to support my own learning? So we're going to try and hold both teacher learning and mathematics in mind, and also add in this idea of social justice. How can we create more just mathematics classrooms? And how can we support our teachers and ourselves to do that? So I'm going to draw upon the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics and the organization Todos Mathematics for All. Created this joint position statement on social justice in mathematics ed that can help us just think about what are some ways that we can advance justice in our mathematics teaching and learning. So they offer 4 big ideas. The first one being this idea of eliminating deficit views of mathematics learning. So we want to find ways that we can challenge deficit thinking. We want to develop tools and practices that really help us see our students as perpetual learners, looking at where they are now and where they're going next, rather than kind of sticking with more static views of students learning, or kind of the deficit discourse that can happen. Particularly, this comes to mind for elementary school. We often hear labeling of kids, right? These are my low kids and my high kids. And we have to really start to get curious about, what does it mean to label kids in that way? What does that do for the opportunities that they are given in my mathematics classroom? And what does that do for their identities as learners? Does it actually help me achieve the goals of advancing all of my students' mathematical learning and helping them develop identities as strong mathematicians? So we just want to kind of inquire about those ideas and start pushing back on some of these ways that deficit thinking can really show up in our classrooms. Eradicating mathematics as a gatekeeper. We like to think in elementary school like that's a high school problem, right? That's when tracking starts. But we know that, that less formal tracking can actually start happening very early in elementary school. Again, those ideas of labels, when we start putting kids in low groups and high groups, we're going to give them really different mathematics experiences. And so we can start, if I'm a kindergarten teacher, if I think about my students now, and if they're given those high or low kinds of opportunities, starting from kindergarten, what will that do to their trajectory, right? So we can start thinking about what are the ways that we can pay attention to how mathematics is being used as a gatekeeper in our own classrooms and in our own schools. And if we're gonna challenge that, we're gonna need to work together, right? We need some ways of thinking about supporting the range of ideas in our classrooms and beginning to see that as an asset, as a strength. We want our kids to have a range of ideas. Otherwise, our math class is going to be pretty boring if we all think the same way, right? So starting to challenge that and seeing it as an asset. Engaging the socio-political turn of mathematics education is really about seeing math as dynamic and political and cultural, recognizing all of the ways that identity and power play into mathematics. So we're going to start thinking about opening up the definition of what it means to learn and do mathematics, starting to think more expansively about who does mathematics in our communities. So if we're going to do that, we want some ways to come to know our students and our families and our communities more deeply, and to use those relationships to really inform the teaching work that we do. And the last one here is this idea of holding professional learning of mathematics teachers and leaders with a dual focus on math and social justice. So we're going to try and keep those both kind of front and center in the work that we are thinking about today, as well as thinking about what does it mean to support teachers and ourselves to go through that learning. Okay, so it will be helpful for us to have a framework for thinking about how to do that. And I'm aware that we're thinking about these ideas in a webinar, right? You're going to take some ideas, hopefully something exciting or new or interesting to you, and then you're going to have to go to your own school or your own classroom, and you're going to have to think about, how do I put these into practice? Right? So you can think of any conference that you've been to, or you watch a video and you get so excited about the activity that's in it, or you read a new book, right? And then you have to go to your classroom or go to your school, go to your work with your teachers, and figure out how you're going to make use of that information. Okay, so that's really common in professional learning. And what we want to think about is how to support a broader range of things that will help people actually make that leap from learning about something to the doing of the thing, right? So this framework called the learning cycle was first really articulated in this article in 2013. Morva McDonald, Elham Kazemi, and Sarah Kavanaugh helped us think about this idea of the learning cycle as a way to organize how we think about supporting teacher learning or our own learning. So a lot of those things that I just described are really good at introducing ideas, right? So this webinar hopefully is good at introducing some ideas. You might watch a video and get ideas. You might participate in an activity as a learner, right? So we could do a number talk together, read a book chapter. Those are all examples of ways that you start to learn about new practices, new activities, or content ideas. So what we want to think about is, where are the other pieces here that can support teachers to take up new practices? So we might think about ways that we help people plan and prepare to actually go and try it out with students. So we might plan together using a planning template can be really helpful so that we have some common framework for how we're thinking about the activity. But then we need to go in and think through the details together, think about who are the students that we're working with and how are we going to make sure that this is an engaging lesson for them? What are the ideas that we anticipate coming out? What will we do in response to those ideas, right? All of those thousands of decisions that teachers are making in their classrooms on a moment by moment basis, we want to think through them together so that people aren't left alone to do that. And then we'll go try it out. So that could be you go try something out in your own classroom if you're a classroom teacher, or it might be that we try something out together. So I saw there's some instructional specialists, some folks in the role of principal or consulting teacher, right? You may have opportunities to be in classrooms alongside of teachers. So are there moments that you can kind of do the work of teaching together? So live coaching, we have what we call teacher timeout, where literally we take a little pause and pause the action of the lesson to think through what are the steps that I could take next. I could go this route or this route. What do you think I should do, right? So we get to try things out together. And then finally, we want to give folks a chance to analyze or make sense of what it is that they have learned about. How did it go when I actually tried it out? And what does that mean for the next time I want to think about it? Okay. So some of these, you'll see little pieces of this happening in your existing professional development, I imagine. And what we want to think about today are some practices that are really aimed at bringing more justice to our mathematics classrooms, and think about it organized around this teacher learning cycle. Okay, so let's give it a whirl. I don't see any questions in the chat, but feel free to add in ideas, questions. If this is bringing up related resources from you that you want to share, please do feel free to use that chat space. All right, so I have two examples of different kinds of practices that we have supported teachers around that are aimed at developing more just classrooms. So this first one, math interviews, is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to go interview our students about their mathematical thinking. So it's an example of a clinical interview. And inside of this, I think of it a lot like in literacy, we sit down and we listen to our students read, right? And so similarly in math, we want to sit down and listen to our students as they are solving mathematical problems. And this can be a more formal experience where you plan it out at the beginning of the year and you have a certain amount of time for each student. It could be a little bit more informal, where you're kind of listening to students throughout each lesson that you are working on, right? So if you pose a problem on Monday, then you're walking around and listening to students as they're solving that problem. Okay. So I'm going to illustrate kind of the learning cycle through this idea of math interviews. So we would introduce the idea of interviewing students to teachers. For primary teachers, we usually suggest doing individual interviews. You got to watch those little ones count. For grades 2 through 5, sometimes you can listen to a couple students at once, or if they're older students, they might be able to work independently, and then you can come check in with them after they've finished solving a problem. And what it's going to look like is you're going to introduce the interview to students, especially if it's the first time. That can feel a little intimidating to students to be listened to, right? What are you watching for? Why are you writing notes, right? We're going to introduce what we're doing to them because they're the teachers for that time, and we're the students of them. We're going to listen. And then we listen to them and we document their thinking. So you see the teacher in this picture, she's got her paper and she's actually just writing notes about what the student says because we'll forget the details later on. So we want to take some notes so that we can remember later and really think about what it is that they were saying and doing. And then after the interview has taken place, then we would go back and think about what is the strategy that the student used. So it makes these interviews different than just giving students a paper pencil test, is that we're going to think not only did they get it right, did they get it wrong, but we're going to really pay attention to what is the strategy that the students were using. And then we'll start to think about what does that mean for their next steps. Okay. So in order to really think about the strategy that students are using, we need some shared language as teachers and some shared knowledge of the trajectory of ideas that students develop around whole numbers. So in this case, we're usually giving whole number problems, but we also do fractions, counting, other tasks. But if we're doing a whole number problem, and I'll give some examples in just a moment, we want to have some shared idea about what are the first strategies that students might use. And then after that, what do they develop next? And where are we trying to go in this grade level, right? What's the range of strategies we might see and how do they progress? So we might do some content learning around that. We might watch some videos then to think about how do we all recognize the strategy that's being used here? What are the interesting details of the child's strategy? And then what might be next for this student? And you can do some similar things when you're analyzing student work. Then here comes the prepare part. So we've introduced this idea of math interviews, and we could just say, okay, good luck, go do it. But it's a lot better if we have some time to think together about how we're going to go do it. So we might think about that idea of introducing the interview to students. What's that going to sound like? When we're recording the student thinking, what should we be writing down? What are the details that really matter to pay attention to? What materials are we going to offer the students, right? So there's lots of details to think through in terms of preparing. So we'll sit down together and do some preparing before we go in and try it out. So I told you some sample problems. So these are problems that we've often used in primary grades. So a counting task where we ask them, can you count the set of tiles or whatever the objects might be and tell me how many there are? In that case, we're going to need to know about the principles of counting, right? Or an addition problem, like Keisha had 6 pennies. Her mom gave her 7 more pennies. How many pennies does she have in all? Right? We'll be listening for and looking for what's the strategy that children are using and what are the interesting details? What kind of tools do they like to use? Are they a confident problem solver? Do they have questions about Keisha and her pennies? Right? This might be also a moment that the teachers could think about making the problems more closely connected to the students' lived experiences. So pennies, not super relevant anymore, right? We don't see a lot of pennies being used, although they're pretty fun to still play with, right? But we could think about, are there contexts that would be more meaningful or more interesting to the students that we work with? All right, so we've picked our questions, we've prepared, and now we're going to go into the classroom and we're going to be doing some interviews with students. So this teacher is sitting listening to a couple of students, and I think we have time. I'm going to play one video of students being interviewed, and we're just going to hear a snippet of their explanation. So we're going to be listening both for, do they get it right? That's important in mathematics, right? But more importantly, what strategy is the child using? And if we can connect it back to our big ideas for this session, how does that help us start to push back on ideas about deficit thinking? How does knowing the student's strategy start to give us more or better language than high and low, right? So we're going to try and connect it back to those ideas as well. Okay, so this student is solving it's 8 times 14 is the problem. I believe it's Hafsa has 8 packs of pencils. There are 14 pencils in each pack. How many pencils does she have is the problem. We're going to listen to this student tell about their strategy. If you cannot hear the video, would you just go ahead and let me know in the chat, but we'll give it a try.
I did first I did 8 times 14 because I know there was 8 packages and there was 14 pencils in each package. So I did 8 times 14 and I did an array. 10 times 8 equals 80 and 4 times 8 equals 32. So at first I knew that 2 times 8 equals 16. So I split it up right here. 10 plus 10 plus 6 plus 6 equals, and I know that 10 plus 10 equals 20, 6 plus 6 equals 12, and 20 plus 12 equals 32. So, and I put 32 over here, then I add these two together, 80 plus 32, which equals 112.
Okay. Could you tell me about your array here? How did you decide on the array? Okay, I'm going to pause there. Hopefully you could hear that. That was a little quiet on my end, but I'm not sure if it's the same for you. So in the chat, if you have chat available, I'd love to hear just some of your noticings and wonderings as you're listening to this student. So I'll try and kind of re-say some of what she said while you're thinking and adding ideas in the chat there. She said, 8 times 14, I broke that up and I made an array. And so she's got 8 and said that that's the same as 8 times 10 and 8 times 4. So a partial product strategy, breaking apart one of those and multiplying. So 10 times 8, she said, I know 10 times 8 is 80. And then this 4 times 8 gets really interesting. I wonder if anybody is chatting about is typing about that in the chat, but it gets really interesting when she gets to the 4 times 8 equals 32. So she kind of comes over here to the side. Yeah. Looking for what she knew first, looking for her entry point. Lovely. Thank you, Tani. Yeah. So she says 4 times 8 equals 32. And we actually see the teacher's notes on the side say 4 times 8 is hard. So I did 10 plus 10 plus 6 plus 6. Oh, yeah. And when we're in a room together, I love this video because people are like, wait a minute, where'd the 10 and the 6 come from? And we really have to wrestle with it. So this student was thinking about, I don't know what 4 times 8 is, but I do know she thought about 2 groups of 16. So she knew 2 times 8 was 16. 16 plus 16, put them together. Okay. Does that make some sense? We'd have to go back and watch it again, but she says, I don't know 4 times 8 off the top of my head. So I know 2 groups of 8 is 16, and 16 plus 16 is the same as 4 times 8. So in this one problem, we learned about the student's strategy for solving a multiplication problem. She thought about it like partial products, kind of breaking apart that 14 into 10 and 4. But we also learned about their strategy for addition, right? What does it look like to add quantities together? It looks like she's also kind of combining 10s and 1s and then putting those together, right? And we learned about her recall of 4 times 8. That wasn't one that she knew off the top of her head, but she did know some relevant facts that were able to help her, right? So we learned a whole lot from this student in about 50 seconds is how long that video clip is. And of course, it will take a little bit longer to have that conversation in real time, but we gain a whole lot of understanding about the student strategy beyond just that they got the answer correct, right? It's helpful to know that they got the answer correct, but then where do we go? And with this information, and you're going to see a whole range of different strategies, with this information that can help us start to think about, okay, what's my next number talk going to be to support this student to keep continuing their learning? How can I connect this student's strategy to another student that I have in my classroom? So we learn a lot more detail about where our students are going, and hopefully we can start to think about and reimagine some of those labels, right? Just correct and incorrect, they always get it right, right? That's not very helpful. But what could be helpful is the student's using a partial product strategy, and I want her to have 4 times 8 at some point as something she just knows off the top of her head. So I wonder what opportunities I can plan to help her with that, right? We can start to think about more specifically, more specifically, some of the strategies that students are using and where to go next. Okay, how am I on time? I'm okay. Okay, so we just went into a classroom and tried out interviewing students together, right? So then we come back and we're ready to analyze the students' thinking and our enactment of interviews and think about where do we go next. So the typical data that we get from a lot of formative assessment is kind of correct, incorrect. And we talked about that with the one student's work. We can also think about it at the level of classroom. So if I think about my class, knowing how many students are getting answers correct and incorrect is somewhat helpful, right? It helps me know, are we kind of on the right track? Do students have a strategy that makes sense for this problem? And then how successful are they using that strategy to get the correct answer? But if we think about the strategies that students are using and we interview them about their strategies, we get a lot more depth of information. So that one student was using a partial product strategy. We can see some of their classmates use direct modeling, which are, I'm not going to go into the full trajectory, but direct modeling where I actually model the actual quantities in the story. So if it was 8 times 14, I might draw 8 groups of 14, maybe circles or maybe using cubes, right? But I actually model the context and the quantity and then count them all, right? Or some of the classmates are using skip counting. Some of the students did not have a valid strategy. So that helps me know the range of students in my classroom, the range of ideas, and imagine how I might connect those ideas in order to continue advancing all of their thinking. I can also dive into the details of individual students' thinking, right? Did this student get it correct? Okay, no, they got it incorrect. Which strategy were they using? I wonder why that happened, right? So we can dive into the details of students' thinking beyond just correct and incorrect. I think I have one more. Oh, no, that's it. Okay, so again, to connect this back to our ideas around creating more just classrooms, by thinking about what do our students know on the trajectory and where can they go next beyond just correct and incorrect, I'm hoping this gives us some language and some actual practices to start working on this idea of eliminating deficit views, of starting to eliminate this idea of math as a gatekeeper. So only some students get experiences that let them work on rich mathematical tasks, right? We want to work on not doing that anymore, right? So how can we use the information that we have about what students do know, what they can do, in order to help us have them be successful participants in really robust mathematical activities? Okay. I'm going to move on to the next example. Obviously, that's not enough information for you to get started on math interviews yourself, but I am going to share some resources out at the end, and I bet you all have some that you could share as well. So Community Math Walks is a second example that we can use the learning cycle to help us think about supporting teacher learning and creating, yay, Math Walks. Tara, add some ideas in, please. Some of you all have helped generate a lot of these ideas, so please do add in the chat. Okay, Community Math Walks. So again, a really descriptive name. It's kind of what it sounds like. You're going to go into the community and you're going to learn about the community. You're going to learn about the people that live in your students' lives and the places that they visit, the practices and activities that happen in those spaces, in order to starting to push back on the idea of, or to develop a new idea of who is mathematical and what it means to do mathematics, and to help us connect real world mathematics that is already happening with the school mathematics that we want them to be learning, right? Can we make those talk to each other so that they don't seem like two separate ideas? So this idea, it comes from Dr. Julia Aguirre over at UW-Tacoma, as well as her colleagues on the Teach Math Project, Aaron Turner and Corey Drake, others. And so we might introduce this idea of community math walks and connect it to lesson design, which we'll get to in just a moment. So some of the teachers that I've worked with have had the pleasure of working with Dr. Julia Aguirre and been introduced by her to the idea. So I will try to live up to that. But some of the big ideas is we want to look for evidence of mathematics happening around us. So when we go to a community space, and we might have to ask our students and families what places they recommend we visit. But when we go to those spaces, we'll think about what's the mathematics that's happening there. We might pick up artifacts or take photos. Of course, we want to ask if there are people in the photos, if we could take the photos, but artifacts that you can use to show to students because they will recognize them, right? Talk to the people in those spaces about how they use mathematics. And then we're going to generate questions from those spaces that we can use in our mathematics classrooms. So before we just go out into the world, we do a little bit of planning together, and the Teach Math website, which I'll share the link at the end, has lots of resources to help you think about planning and preparing to go do your community math walk. And then we're going to go. We're going to listen to people in our local community, the school community, in order to kind of learn about the mathematics that is already taking place there and expand our own notions of what it means to do math. So in this example, this is a grocery store in Kent that was close to the school, the teachers that I was working with. And many of the students had said that this was a store that they were familiar with, so they felt like it was an important place to go and visit. And you can start to begin to imagine some of the mathematical questions that might come out of just these few pictures, right? You can also start to imagine some of the connections that students might make. They might have a lot of experience with some of these items being sold in the store, some of the fruits, right? They're going to bring their own cultural and social knowledge to these images, which may be a unique thing for them, right? So we want to make that less unique. We want them to start to see their world as mathematical and their world as important to take up in the classroom. So inside this store, after doing the community math walk, we come back together and we start to analyze our practice, right? What did we learn about our community that we didn't know before? What did we learn about how math is used in our community? And then starting to think about what are the mathematical ideas that children might notice or wonder about some of the images or artifacts that we've brought back. So I'll share an example of a math task that came out of a community math walk. I'm skipping a little bit over the prepare. There's a whole separate preparation that we might do around preparing a mathematical task to go into a classroom. So I'm going to just acknowledge that I'm skipping some steps. But we planned our math task, and then we go to a kindergarten classroom actually, and tried out some questions about these set of images that were also located right next to the same school. So in the chat, you're welcome to start adding in what might they notice or wonder about these images? They might notice mathematical things. Feel free to add in some of those things you think that you might notice that are mathematical. They might notice other things, right? They might say, this is right down the street. And sure enough, they did do that. They might say, I love the burritos, right? That's my favorite. They're going to have a lot to say that is both mathematical and non-mathematical, and all of those are really useful context for them as they are learning about their world. Okay, no, you're welcome to please do add some ideas about what kids might notice and wonder, and I'll tell you a little bit about what they actually said. So we took this to, oh, I didn't add the question. So we took these two images to a kindergarten classroom. And we first asked them, similar to how I'm asking you, what do you notice? What do you wonder? We just broadly asked students, what do they notice and what do they wonder? And then we posed a more direct mathematical question. Oh, Sarah's adding the tortilla is cut into 4 parts. The plate is half rice and half tortilla. Yeah, they said things like that for sure. The question that we posed to kindergarten students was, if 2 people wanted to share the quesadilla, how many pieces should each person get? And when I first suggested that as a possibility, some of the teachers were like, I don't know about that. We haven't done division in kindergarten, right? How many people are in the restaurant? Yeah, another good question. So we're going to give students a pretty complex problem for kindergartners, right? But I knew that they had a lot of experiences with sharing. They had a lot of experiences, many of them, with this particular restaurant and with quesadillas. So I thought they might be able to bring some of that knowledge to bear in this situation, and we can kind of push ourselves to think about what can students do beyond our expectations. So here's what some kindergartners said. They said, this particular student, you can see some of the mathematical ideas, right, that they are sharing. So on the right side, we have the full plate with 4 pieces and little dots to represent the rice, right? And then there are 2 people. So they've represented the 2 people that are sharing the quesadilla. And if you look at their tiny plate, there are indeed 2 pieces of triangular quesadilla and little itty bitty tiny dots, right? So this student made sense of the problem. There's 2 people sharing and kind of shared not only the quesadilla, but also the rice, right? They're thinking about how to share that full plate. So gave 2 to each person. If we think about this student's work, if you look on the left side, there are 2 people, and I think there are kind of ghost people that weren't quite good enough, right? So we've got 2 new people, and those 2 people have quesadilla, and this one is not triangularly shaped, right? It's kind of ripped. It's kind of like shared, like when you split something in pieces. So they thought about kind of tearing apart their quesadilla. And again, they gave each of the 2 people 2 pieces of quesadilla. We also see on the right side, there's a picture. And I'm not sure if you can tell or not, but the 2 little guitars are next to the sign, right? So this student has represented the restaurant as well as the trees around the restaurant, right? So one important thing that mathematicians are doing is learning about what details are important in this problem. Kindergarten teachers will tell you that students are going to draw the pictures, right? The full pictures, just like this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The student is really representing the entire context, which is right down the street from them. So they really have a mental image of it, right? So at some point, they'll start to learn about, that's actually not important details for me to include right now. I'm working on math, right? But for now, they're really paying attention to the context. Okay, one more. Oh, I just love this one. There's 2 people, and one of those people is me, I'm pretty sure, and I don't know how I feel about that hairstyle. But again, this student has thought of a different way to share the plate. They said that this person on the right would get the quesadillas. You can see all 4 pieces there. And the person on the left would get the rice. A different way to share. Not the question we asked, but still mathematically relevant, right? They're thinking about fair sharing that plate. So all these students had ideas that we would not have uncovered if we had not used a context from their community, if we had not asked them something that actually was really, really challenging. They had to grapple with it. They're not often asked to think about a division context, right? So by kind of pushing ourselves to think about the world around us and how kids might see it, and then also pushing ourselves to think about what is possible for children to work on, we gained a lot of information about what they know and can do. This kind of goes beyond the learning cycle a little bit and beyond Community Math Walk itself. But I thought it was useful to know that when you introduce some of these practices, they can take on a life of their own. And so this school took images that they took on their Community Math Walk and used them actually in their family math night. So they wanted to reflect back to the community. We see you, right? We see the mathematics that is happening all around us. We see the connections that our students can be making to the real world. And we want to put those back to you as mathematical. So they put up images from the community and then posed questions about them. So this one, they asked about the shapes of the different breads that were in the restaurant, as well as other images that they put up around with different prompts. So we have just a couple of minutes, and then I will stick around for questions if folks have them or want to chat some more. But I want to make sure that you know that this idea of the learning cycle doesn't have to be its own separate event. You don't have to redo your PD calendar for next year. You can think about how it fits into your existing routines. Or if you're a classroom teacher, you can think about, what are the pieces that I really need more of? Do I need more opportunities to prepare with other teachers? Do I actually need some time to sit down and analyze what I've already done, right? So for example, this could fit into your existing routines, like a staff meeting. Maybe you've introduced a new idea. Maybe you take up this idea of community math walk at the beginning of the school year and you want people to learn about them. So you introduce them at a staff meeting. And then during PLC meetings, maybe the grade level team then sits down and plans and thinks about how they're going to go enact that practice. And then teachers go try it in their classroom or go out into the community and actually give it a whirl. And then maybe the next PLC meeting, they think about, what did we learn? Go try it again. And then maybe at the next staff meeting, we all share school-wide what it is that we're learning about and noticing, make some commitments for the future. Okay. So it's not something that you have to design specially. It's a framework that you can have in mind as you think about, what is it that people need in order to take up these really ambitious and complex practices that are really connected to the students in front of us and our school's history and community. With that, I will leave you with some resources. I can put these in the chat. Let me copy and paste that. So there are resources. Of course, you're going to need to learn more because I've only done the introduce part, right? So you'll need some ways to plan, to try out ideas, and then to reflect and analyze them. So I'd love to continue to be in conversation with you, but these are other resources that could be helpful. So Teacher Education by Design has resources across content areas that are organized specifically around the learning cycle. And those resources are designed for teacher educators, for people leading professional development. Learning from Children website has lots of resources around math interviews, if that's an idea that is interesting to you, including like sample problems, videos, resources for analyzing student thinking. We also have a summer course that is really connected to that. So there's both a preschool through first grade cohort, as well as a second through fifth grade cohort, where we do essentially what I described. We're going to learn about the content knowledge that we need to have in order to make sense of student strategies. We're going to practice interviewing. We're going to plan for our classroom so that day one, when we walk into the classroom, we're ready to sit down and listen to our kids' thinking and have a new way of thinking about assessment. Oops. Whoops. One more, the Teach Math Project has lots of resources around community math walks as well. All right. This particular webinar has been part of a series, the Spring Forward webinar series. There's videos for many of the other ones in the series. So if you were hoping to participate in one and didn't get a chance to, you can go back to our Spring Forward website, which I can drop in the chat too, and check out the recordings. We've got lots of other things going on this summer too. So you can use the QR code or the chat. I'm gonna have to put a lot of things in the chat, or check out our website where you can find out more. We just launched a STEM course. So if you're looking for STEM clock hours or know teachers that are, I know those ones are very hard to get. So we're going to be thinking about language across math and science and how language is used. But there's lots of other great things here. So go check out summer offerings. And then we also do ongoing experiences and custom professional development. So if that's interesting to you, I'd love to chat more with you about it. And with that, I will let folks go that need to take off, and I will stick around for any questions that you all might have, things that you want to chat about. Thank you all.